My name is Aisha and this is my story. When I grew up with two brothers and two sisters, so there was five of us. My mom and my dad were really young and my dad was in the army, so we did move a lot. It was a stable home, like my parents they argued, but I didn't feel like it was anything out of the ordinary. I don't know if that's normal or if it was just we were so used to it at that point. We grew up with a very strict dad. He was in the army, so he liked everything to basically be miraculous. Like he wanted everything to be clean and he wanted everything to be perfect, and it was very hard to kind of keep up with the expectations, and he yelled a lot. And it was weird because we knew he cared for us, but it was almost like he needed that emotional relief, which was very difficult for all of us. When I turned 9 years old, I was sleeping in my bed one time and I woke up to all of this commotion basically, and my dad was basically running around the house saying that my mom wasn't feeling very good and she couldn't breathe. She had asthma, so it was kind of typical for her to use the little machine that she has next to her bed. And so at the time I didn't think too much of it. I'm the second youngest of five, so I figured my older siblings would kind of just figure it out. They rushed her to the hospital and we went to go sleep at our neighbor's house. And the next day we went to the hospital and they basically told us that she was no longer with us. And it was difficult for me because I didn't really understand what was going on. I knew she was gone, but I didn't understand why or how. When that happened, my family kind of separated into different parts of the state, really. So I moved in with my aunt and my uncle. My dad, he lost custody of my older siblings because they weren't biologically his. And so not only did I lose my mom, I then lost my older siblings. My younger brother and I stayed together, so that was a plus, but even then it was very difficult for us to kind of find that stability that we were looking for. Fast forward a few years, my dad got remarried finally and we moved in with him, and it was stable for a while. It was nice to know that, like, you had a mom and you had a dad and you had your siblings, and it was kind of just like going through the motions, right? By this time, I was a little bit older. And then we were living in Missouri, and one day my dad woke us up again and basically said, "We're moving." And I was in shock. I was a teenager, so I didn't really understand, but my dad was leaving my stepmom, who he had remarried. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, another loss. And I felt sad, but I also felt, again, very unstable. It's like it goes up and you're like doing good for a while and then it just falls apart. And that's what like my life felt like. It felt like I constantly was going up and doing good, and then something drastic happens and I lose someone. We moved to North Carolina. My brother, my dad, and myself, my older siblings, were with other family members. At that time, they were a little bit older, living in California. When I moved to North Carolina, that's really where I started figuring out who I was. I stayed there until I think it was my junior year, high school, and I went to go visit my sister in California, and I met a girl. I was 15 at the time. I met her and she was 21. I just grew this very strange attachment. Like I wanted to be around her, and I thought that, this was the thing for me. So we started a relationship. It was long distance, obviously, because I lived in North Carolina, but I was just visiting for California, and my dad found out and he was not happy. And I don't think he was upset because she was a girl. I think it was more because she was so much older than I was. And at that time, I saw my sister and she was dating her ex-girlfriend. I kind of just thought, it's fine, like whatever. It kind of felt like the end thing to do. And that sounds horrible, but I was 15, so I just figured, let's try it. It was one of the worst relationships I've ever had in my life. That was the time that I realized that people don't always have your best interests at heart, and it really shook me. I was with her for 3 years, and it was a very controlling relationship. She wouldn't even let me go to the grocery store without blowing up my phone, asking who I'm with, making me call from my house phone to prove that I was at home. It was very toxic, but in the moment it didn't feel toxic. It felt like I was 15 and she was 21, so I just, maybe this is how relationships are when you get older, and you kind of like compromise. That's what it felt like in the moment. We always talked about when I turned 18, I would move out of my house, out from my parents, and move in with her. And so we were together for 3 years on and off, and a week, I think, before my 18th birthday, I gave her a call and she changed her number. I didn't hear from her for 2 years after that, I believe. She basically ghosted me, is what they would call it, I guess. I sat there and I thought, another loss. Now I look back on it and I realize that it was probably one of the best things she could have done for me, but because I don't think I ever would have just walked away on my own accord, but it felt very traumatic for me. It felt like every time I feel good and people are here for me, they're all of a sudden not. Soon after that, I met a group of people who also were not very good for me. I started a job, and my friends at the job did a lot of party drugs. I felt lost. I was by myself. I didn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or anything like that, and I met some people that I thought were my friends, and we would hang out every day. We did things that I honestly can't even comprehend. Like, it was very the party lifestyle that I didn't think that I would ever live, and I was just there because I felt like that's where I should be. And it was not hard in the moment, you know, looking back, I realized how alone I felt, even though I was with people every single day. Like, I didn't talk to my family a whole lot. Like, my siblings knew where I was, but then they also didn't know what I was doing really. And so and I was living with friends, and I was living with my dad, and I lived out of my car for a little bit. So it was a lot of, I just felt like I was being a regular teenager and doing those things. And one day I woke up and I realized I don't want to do the drugs anymore. I don't want to party anymore. And I had a boyfriend at the time, and we kind of like stepped back from that life for probably about 6 months. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I was 19 years old, and I was terrified to tell my dad because he was very strict. And I lived with him at the time, and I told him, and he was very supportive. And I had my first son when I was 19. It changed my life. It went from going 100 down the fast lane to kind of slowing everything down. And I realized like how much I loved being a mom. I was with my son and his dad for about 1.5 or 2 years. And then we broke up, and I met my current husband now. And my husband and we've been together now for 8 years, but at that time I had a son from my ex. He was 2 years old, and my boyfriend, my husband now, he was long distance in college, and he eventually moved out here, and I had 2 more kids after that with my husband. So at this time I have 3 kids. I have a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 2-month-old. Life was good. My husband had moved out here, so he was taking care of my kids, helping me out, and then my son's dad is also, he's a great dad as well, so he kind of did the co-parenting with us, and it was good for a while. You know, life was fun. Like, we didn't really have too many issues. And then one night my husband and I were watching a movie, and my 2 younger kids were upstairs sleeping, and we were watching a movie. The movie ended. We went upstairs to go check on the kids before we went to bed. It was like 12:30 in the morning. I went to go check on my 2-month-old, and my husband went to go check on my 1.5-year-old. I'm walking to my son, and I hear my husband screaming, and he's like, call an ambulance, call an ambulance. And so I ran over, and I could see my 1.5-year-old. He was laying in the bed, and he's not moving. I don't know if I knew that he was gone already, but I knew it was not good. I called 911, and my husband was up there, and he like laid him on the floor. And I remember the phone call because I was yelling at the lady, and it's not typically what I do, telling her, you know, like, hurry up. And they finally get there, and they basically tell us that it's too late. Like, he's already gone. We were so confused because he was healthy. He walked, he talked. It was a very traumatic time for us. We had his funeral, and my aunt, she actually went to the Crossing, and she recommended one of the pastors there speak at my son's funeral. So he did, and he recommended that we go to a program called Grief Share at the Crossing. And when we got there, it was very fresh. The first day we got there, I think it's been like 2 weeks maybe since he had passed. And There was a whole bunch of people there who we talked to about the situation, and we watched the videos and like had the small group discussions. And in my mind, I thought, wow, like I'm gonna get through this program, and then after this program, I'm gonna be healed, and I'm gonna be able to move forward with my life and do all of the things that I need to do for my other kids. Finished the program, my husband and I both did, and we both felt it was helpful. As traumatic as it was, like we knew that our kids needed us, and so we kind of just moved forward. At that time, I was going to church every Sunday and all of these things, and then probably like a year later, I kind of just fell off. My life got busy. I had 2 more kids, so 5 total, but 4 in my home, and I occupied myself, and I was doing all of the things, you know, that I had to do. Last August, actually, I had surgery to get my gallbladder taken out, and it was very, very painful. The recovery was painful, and one day I woke up and the pain was gone, and I'm like, oh, like I told myself, I was like, wow, like I'm so grateful that that hard part of my life was over, because it was like physically painful. And then not too long after that, I think I had my very first anxiety attack. I sat in my room and I was just crying, and I didn't know why, and I felt like everything was wrong. I didn't understand it, because at this time my son has been passed for 6 years. My mom had passed over 20 years ago, and so my kids are healthy, I'm healthy, my husband is healthy, and so I was kind of just at a loss for like what was going on emotionally, because every day for 3 weeks I would wake up and not want to be here. Truthfully, like I wanted to be here for my kids, but I didn't feel like I had anything to look forward to. Every time I turned a corner, I felt like something horrible was going to happen, and I just didn't feel myself. And so one day I pulled my husband and I aside, and I said, something's wrong. And the only thing that I could think of to do is bring it all to God. And so I did that. I joined a group called Rooted. I went back to Grief Share, and I started going to a CR class called Celebrate Recovery at my church. And I would be at church 4 times a week, focusing on me and figuring out what's going on. And the first day I went to Celebrate Recovery, I was about to walk into the doors, and there's a big sign that says, "It's okay to not be okay." And I just stood there crying in front of a whole bunch of people I did not know, because that was the first time I realized that I'm not by myself. It's okay to feel this way, and that there's another side to it, right? Like I could get over this. I just need to figure out what's going on in my own life. When I first lost my son, my husband and I had a conversation one day about why. And I think that's the biggest question for a lot of people, is like, why did God let this happen? And for me, that's one thing like I never really asked myself. It was more so, I need something to give me hope that he's not just out somewhere and by himself and lonely. I went to church service one day, and they played this song. It was called No Longer a Slave, basically discussing fear. And that's where I was at. I was so afraid that things were going to be wrong, and I realized that God is my hope. Right? Like he's the one who's going to get me through all of this and kind of guide me to where I need to be. And I'm just so grateful that I had that, because if I didn't believe that my son was with God and my son is okay, then I don't know how I would have been able to get through him being gone here physically. I think one of the biggest things that I learned this year, I went to Grief Share, and I watched one of the videos, and I started crying almost uncontrollably, and I walked out of the room, and one of the leaders came up to me, and I kind of explained to her my fears and why I was so distraught and upset. And she told me a very key thing that has really helped me in my own journey, but also kind of bringing all of my family and getting through all of the tragedies that we've been through. She said that I may have personally surrendered my own life to God, let him make my decisions for me, kind of show me my own path. I've, surrendered my job and my husband, my friends, all of these things to God, but the one thing I haven't surrendered is my children. And in my mind, I'm like, well, my children are my own. You know, that's how I felt. It basically said, they're not yours. They're God's. And I really took a step back, right? Because I'm like, you're right. I surrendered my own life. I surrendered my friend's life. I surrendered my material things, like all of these things I've surrendered, and I haven't surrendered my kids. And she said, once you understand that God is going to make their own path for them because those are his children, you won't be so stressed. Because if you really trust in him, being anxious is really, really difficult. And I never considered that before, and it was really eye-opening for me. One of the most life-changing things I've ever heard, because I figured out she was right in the process of doing that. But it helps with my anxiety to say, no matter what I do, I could be the best mom I can be, and God still has a plan for them, and I can't derail that. There's nothing I can do to derail that. And so I just gotta live today the way I want, and serve others, and serve my kids, and do all those things that I feel like are the right things to do. And God will make a path for them, and he'll make a path for me. And that's one of my biggest lessons. Trusting in Jesus has given me victory over being fearful, feeling lost, and learning how to surrender my life and my kids' lives and everything else around me. I started doing Rooted, and it kind of opened up a lot of wounds for me, but it also, by the end of it, it closed them back up. You know, I felt like I wasn't alone, and I felt like there was people who, even though they don't have the same situation, can console me anyway, that can be there for me and support all of my emotional things that I thought I dealt with, but truthfully kind of just went around. And I never really thought that it was gonna be as eye-opening as it was. I'm so grateful now because I have a huge support system of faithful and dedicated women who have the same vision as me, who have the similar faith as me, and who believe in the same things I do. It showed me that we all have our own stuff, and even though it's not the same stuff, we could still be there for each other. I'm so blessed because last August, 6 years ago when my son passed, that is not the same person that I am today, and I'm just so grateful that God got me to where I am, because I need to be here. I need to be here for my kids. I need to be here for my husband and for myself. And so I'm really grateful.